one more amazing speaker. It's Matthias Tauber. Matthias is a senior partner at BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, and he's actually the chair of BCG pretty much all around the world, especially in Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. And he is with us right here and right now, so please join me in welcoming Matthias Tauber.
Hey, Peter. Hi, Peter. Great to see you.
Excellent.
Hi.
Well, it's so nice to see you. Please
Yeah.
take a seat. We're so happy to have you, Matthias. And I have to ask you as well, for me, this is not my home. Is it your home, Munich?
Yes, it is. So I indeed just walked over from our offices. I'm at BCG, obviously. I'm based in Munich, and the offices are a 15 minutes walk from here. So it's one of the few occasions I actually could walk to a meeting.
Wow.
So thank you for having me, Peter.
Yeah, we're very honored that you did that. And so tell us a little bit about yourself. I want to ask you about BCG. I think most of us know BCG from, of course, its reputation. It works for companies around the world. Tell us maybe first, Matthias, because I look at your name, I hear you speak, and I think, Matthias, he's from here. He's a German. But I know that that's not true. Tell me, because I'm very confused.
Yeah, Peter, we met in Davos, right? And I told you the full story. So in fact, as Peter said before, I'm based in Munich. I also sort of am based in BCG Germany, but originally I grew up in the very north of Italy. So I hold an Italian passport. I know that I don't look like, I know I don't sound like, I know my name doesn't sort of read at all, but indeed I am Italian. It's true, right? So I grew up in the very north of Italy, which is in a place called the Dolomites. It's just south of the border. And I'm sort of a native German speaker, but I do speak Italian as a second language. And I think it is in some ways representative also of how sort of we look at talent at BCG, right? There's a sort of very diverse set of talent which we welcome at BCG, obviously on the gender side, but then also sort of when it comes to international profiles and profiles with sort of a very specific identity such as mine.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's true. So
you're both Italian and a little bit German, or at least a German speaker. Matthias, so tell us now a little bit about BCG. I think most of us know BCG by reputation. We actually had one of your colleagues over last year, so we know about your work in AI, for example.
Yeah.
But tell us, what is BCG today? What does it do? How big is it? Who does it consult?
Yeah. So let me start with a few maybe numbers to orient us. So by the end of 24, we had globally 33,000 colleagues overall. We are present pretty much all over the globe. We are organized in 3 regions. One is North America, the other one is Asia Pacific, and then there is my region, which is sort of the rest of the world, right, in that sense. It's about 40 countries, and it's Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and South America. We are sort of advising, as you say, companies across a range of fields. Obviously, our root is in strategy, right? I'm sure you all heard about the matrix, the BCG growth matrix. We don't do growth matrix anymore, but we advise a lot when it comes to where to take a company strategically, but then also in other functional areas on the marketing and sales side, on the operation side, on the organization side, on the, importantly, technology side. We advise companies on how to become, I would say, leaders in their field. And importantly, you mentioned that AI plays a huge role, both in sort of what we advise companies on, but also importantly, also how we work ourselves these days. So a large chunk of our work these days is indeed helping companies unlock the full potential of AI. I mean, we both were in Davos, right? And the saying in Davos was, look, I see AI everywhere, but not in my bottom line. So that sort of was the most common saying of the typical CEO in Davos. So as BCG, we sort of hope to change that, right? So we translate AI into the bottom line. So that's a big chunk of our work. And then secondly, as I said before, it also does change the way we as consultants work, of course, right? So much of our employees use heavily AI tools these days.
What is the tool they use most, would you say?
So we are a technology partner with OpenAI. So we leverage a lot of the LLM technology of OpenAI. Then sort of there is different stacks of the AI technology deployed. It's obviously all different versions of ChatGPT, right, as the base stack. Then we have sort of a layer above, something called BCG-Q, which sort of uses part of that OpenAI technology, but actually sources data which is proprietary to BCG, so not like ChatGPT, the open web, the private web, and makes that available to consultants. So that's sort of two types of, I would say, technology we use in our stack. And then there's many more sort of smaller, I would say, custom GPTs, which we use in the day-to-day work. So it's
and heavily means most of your consultants would use it every day, all the time.
So we actually, absolutely, we track adoption.
Big Brother is watching you.
Big Brother is watching you, but I think it is sort of, we feel sort of initially to get it started, we do need to provide incentives and so on, and we indeed see sort of on, I would say, a consultant level adoption, like people that use it every day, to your point, it's like 95 to 100%. It is true that the more senior people get, the less adoption we see. So my senior partner colleagues are sort of the hardest ones to sort of get over the line, but I'm sure we will succeed as well there.
That's excellent. You know, you said something funny early on as you present yourself, which I think suggests that you like self-deprecating humor, but I want to ask you whether there's any substance to it. You said we have three major regions in BCG. We have North America, we have Asia, or emerging Asia, and then we have the rest of the world. Now, you know, I think most of us belong to rest of world. We are then in rest of world. We are here in Europe, that's part of rest of world. There's Middle East, Africa, Latin America. That is this region that you're talking about, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Now, I'm sure that you are very proud of the region that you lead. You are the chair of this region. But tell us, to what extent is there any substance to it at all that this region is eclipsed by the US and China?
Yeah. So first of all, I am very proud of that region. I am very proud of BCG in that region. I'm very proud of our clients and our colleagues in that.
How much
region.
percent would you say is that of the global business?
At BCG, it's about 40-40-20. So 40% is what I do, 40% is North America, and 20% is Asia. So roughly, I think, in terms of the split. So it is important. Yeah. And I am very proud, as you said, of what we have achieved there for our clients, for our people, and so on. Now, you ask a good question. I mean, there is. So when you talk to CEOs these days, there is a huge transatlantic divide. Yeah? If you talk to CEOs in the US, sometimes you say, oh my God, how much optimism? I mean, can this really be true, right? And then you talk sort of to CEOs on this side of the Atlantic and you say, oh my God, is there anything else other than pessimism, right? So there is a big transatlantic divide, I would say, in how people and executives do see the world, the future. I don't share that. I am actually, I'm an optimist by nature, and I do feel that there is a lot of also very positive things and also opportunities, quite frankly, around. That's not easy, right? And I think things will have to change, will have to evolve, right? Both on a national, on a European, and frankly also on a corporation level to unlock some of them. But I see a lot of opportunities also.
What is an area that you are optimistic about specifically in this part of the world? That you say there's a bright future in this industry or in this country?
So one thing, for example, I am optimistic about is that we are unlocking more investment as we speak. I mean, we're right here in Germany. You probably followed the news. There is talks about investment on the defense side, but also on the infrastructure side on a significant scale. Now, you may say, oh my God, all this debt, right? But I do think that that investing in our future will, I think, both obviously help the industries that are sort of participating in that, in this case, the defense industry, but also the industries sort of helping to build that infrastructure. But also they will provide the basis for many other industries in that part of the world. So that's one thing that...
That's sort of the idea that you know, a lot of the big tech companies in the US grew out of the military bases in San Francisco and sort of the military industrial complex there, or that Israel as a startup nation it also has as a base that it has a very strong military. Yes. You say that is something that you've seen elsewhere and that could happen. It could actually have that positive technological side effect as well in Europe.
It will, I think, it will. And I'm actually quite certain that it will have a positive side effect. Now, it's also true that it's needed, because if you look at sort of GDP growth during the last years, there was a big gap between North America and Europe. North America did grow faster. I do think we need to catch up, and I think we need to do our part. I think the investment, as I said, will play its part. Another area which makes me positive and confident about, I would say, the part of the world I'm responsible for is the breadth of talent. And I mean, I'm looking around in this room, but not only. I think we have, there is really a lot of excellent talent available in core Europe, but not only. And I think that will, ultimately sort of make its way. Yeah?
Right. Now, let me ask you another thing, which I know that BCG has been very strong on, and I've talked to a few of your colleagues that focus on the geopolitics and trade as a specialty, you know, how to navigate all the turbulence in geopolitics and trade. Now, we alluded to in our earlier conversation, but on this stage a few weeks ago, we had the Munich Security Conference, which also foreboded not just what's happening in Ukraine and all the developments there, but also what we're seeing right now in the US, this sort of divide between the US and Europe, the emergence of a trade war. When you look at that, what is, in general terms, the best way that a company can deal with that kind of disruption, the trade, the tariffs going up, you know, the turbulence in political relationships, and basically all that was true that they counted on in the past to build their company may no longer be true?
So this is a really, I would say, live topic. I mean, I'm sure you all watched the sort of tariff discussion, and it's huge, right? It is huge. Independent of how you politically think about it, it's huge, right? I mean, it affects, just from a US perspective, just sort of trade with China, Canada, Mexico, that's sort of the immediate countries that are being talked about, is 44% of the US trade, 44%. It's gigantic. Yeah? So I think there is a huge, I would say, huge discussion at play. So it is a very topical, I would say, thing to discuss. Now, number one. Number two, you did say that indeed as BCG we have a center which is called Center for Geopolitics. It's housed in our Henderson Institute, and we are it's a think tank that collects insights, data about trade flows and helps companies navigate. It's one of the most sought after things these days because it's obviously a very, very hard landscape to navigate with, again, fast pace of change overall. So that's what we do. Now, what are we advising companies in this, I would say, general climate? I think there is a number of things that for companies are pivotal at the moment. The first thing, and I think it's maybe the most obvious one, is that every company these days needs to build its geopolitical muscle. So when you go back 10 years, companies like Siemens, we had Ms. Wiese on stage just before, geopolitics wasn't a discussion. You made an investment, right? You made an investment decision. It was about the business case. It was about risk. It was about financing. It was about how would you get the talent there and so on. Did you talk about geopolitics? No, you didn't. Zero, right? Today, it's a huge discussion, right? Whenever you build a plant, you talk about the geopolitical considerations about that particular location, about the supply chain implications and so on. So I think to inform that part of very important decisions, investment decisions and others, companies do need to build up what we would call the geopolitical muscle. This is teams, small teams, high caliber teams that are advising management boards, advisory boards around this particular topic. So that's the first thing we recommend to companies. The second thing we do recommend to companies to very carefully think about their supply chains. So it is, you're obviously more exposed if your supply chains span the globe and you're not as regional, not as local in your supply chain as maybe some other competitors. So rethinking your supply chain, both in terms of, I would say, regionalization, localization, but also flexibility and backup plans is a big deal, because otherwise you may well, because of all the changing things, suffer either tariffs, shortages. This started, by the way, also already during COVID, but it is also something which is sort of, that's a second thing we are advising companies. But so that's sort of two, I would say, cornerstones of the advice we give.
So if you're looking now very concretely at what's happening, you alluded to it, the trade war that has started between the US and Canada, Mexico and China, with the European Union probably not far behind. Is there any other advice that you can give to companies other than saying either start building factories in the US or go talk to your prime minister or chancellor and pray for a diplomatic solution? Is there anything else that they can do?
Look, there is other things you can think about. You can think about other growth markets. You know, you can sort of, then that's also a third piece of advice we do give to companies. It's sort of think about markets you may have not had on your radar screen so much before, often in the global south. Yeah? So this is now specifically to European countries. We have Mercosur, which is sort of a trade agreement between Latin America and Europe, which opens up several opportunities on the Latin American side. India is emerging as a huge market. So I think broadening your footprint on the customer base beyond, I would say, the more traditional markets in North America is also a good idea.
Wow. I mean, I mean, sure, you know, and that is another option, but it's really a little bit, yeah, I scratch my head literally thinking about the idea that for European companies who've for so long had so many strong ties with the US, that actually they would now have to say, well, you know what, we'll have to look elsewhere. But it is, of course, a reality that you have to bear in mind, because 25% tariffs, Matthias, and maybe you can enlighten us a little bit on this, when you get, because we all hear all these percentages being thrown around, but what I've heard is if you have up until 10% tariffs, that you can absorb one way or the other. The moment you go above 20%, it really starts to disrupt your supply chain and your business and your competitiveness. Is that, would you say that that's fair, more or less?
It depends really. It's really category by category and product by product in the end. But what is true, 25% is a lot. And I think the general theory about tariffs is that obviously at some point they will have to be passed on to the consumer. And obviously are sort of making those, I would say, companies that have to sort of incorporate them in their calculation less competitive versus competitors that don't, right? So I think that also makes sort of, that creates the imperative about rethinking your supply chains, which was my second point, before. So yes, the answer to the question is 25% are meaningful, right? They're meaningful both for the company. They're frankly probably also meaningful for the consumer on the other end of the spectrum,
right.
Which, and look again, depending on where you sit on the political and economic spectrum, it may well be inflationary as well.
Final question on the business side. You know, we are in a country where the automotive industry has historically been extremely strong as a motor, literally and by a figure of speech, for the entire economy. We've seen, I think, sort of a collective depression almost among many people in the automotive industry, including its leaders. Do you see a bright future for European and German automotive, or are we going to have to manage a decline?
It's clearly an industry in transformation, right? I mean, it's hard to tell where we are. I think we have it, I would say, as I said before, I'm an optimist. I think we have things in our own hand, right? But we will have to transform, right, in order to stay competitive. I think what is happening is that there are strong competitors emerging in China, in particular, but not only. Particularly when it comes to the BEV side, there is an advantage, both on the bill of materials, people are talking different numbers, but you're talking 10 to 15% cost advantage because of some of the, I would say, longer-term raw material strategies China has deployed and many other things. So there are strong competitors emerging, which I think the European industry has to deal with. And the historic, I would say, competitive advantage in the IC, on the internal combustion engine, which still exists, is less and less relevant. So I think there is an industry in transformation, and I think the transformation will have to encompass many things. It's one on the technology side. I think it is important for companies to embrace a multi-powertrain world. Yeah.
Right.
I would hope that also this is embraced by the regulator in the right way. I think it is important also to embrace a change on the demand side. And I would again hope that sort of on the regulator side, I think Europe overall wakes up to it. And then I think, look, I do think we have a chance. I said earlier, this region, Europe, Germany is home to strong talent. I think that holds true also in that industry, and I would hope we can take it on.
Yeah, you end on that positive note because you're an optimist. But when I hear a consultant say an industry is going through a transformation, that usually doesn't bode very well for the people in that industry. But we're gonna leave it at that.
I'm not sure.
We're gonna leave it at that because I want to ask you some personal questions. Yeah. And I asked this same question to Judith earlier on. You know, if you think back, Matthias, if we can take you back in time to when you were the age of the students are now, when you were in your early 20s, did you already know you were going to be a thought leader at BCG and chair of rest of the world, or were you still happily skiing in northern Italy or something like that?
Well, this is a good question. I was quite far away, I have to say, from that, Peter. So, I'm actually an engineer by background. So I went to university, I went to engineering school, and look, before I started at BCG in the year, I started as a visiting associate, which is in 2002, so more than 20 years ago, and then started as an associate in 2003 thereafter. But I was an engineering student, and look, when I first applied at BCG, I had the idea of doing something different, but I had literally no idea what I was getting into, right? Literally no idea. So I got into it, I got to enjoy it, but I came to it from a background which had nothing to do with business. So you're much better positioned than I, certainly for a career in consulting at the time. So I had to learn a lot. I learned a lot and I got to like it over time. But I came from a place which didn't have much to do with consulting.
Right,
yeah.
So it was one of those cases where you start a career in consulting on the one hand because you like what it promises, but on the other hand also because it's sort of by elimination, I don't know what else to do.
It wasn't quite like that. It wasn't quite like that. I actually had, my original idea was, look, I'm gonna try this out for a summer, and then I will go back to engineering. Because that's really what I would like to do. So I had actually a plan A, which I quite liked, I have to say. So, but then plan B turned out to be quite fascinating. So I sort of did my summer internship and I really enjoyed it. I really did. And the one thing I think, besides me enjoying it, made a big difference was at the time, and I still think back to that a lot, was at the time my project manager, so the person leading the project, which I was on there. And I still say this today to our project managers. I think he made a huge difference in my life. He made a huge difference in my life because he actually, look, I was an engineer. I showed up. I was good when in everything on the analytical side, but God, I had not much idea about how to communicate, how to sort of bring insights across and so on. And he took the time. He genuinely took the time about sort of helping me, mentoring me, and sort of, also helping me enjoy what I was doing. And I think it's something that I hold close to my heart, and I think it's also a little bit of a piece of advice I would give to all of you. I think this, look out for people that can help you. Look out for mentors. They can come from very different places, and people are genuinely interested in helping you. They are, right? So I think creating that network, and Judith said it earlier, building that external network, but but also creating that network of people that can help you in different phases of the career is super important. And for me, this person made a big difference. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that project leader that saw something in a very young summer, essentially.
Yeah, that's very beautiful, and we often forget that, right? That when we think back of our careers, we think of the steps we took, and sort of you can look at somebody's CV and you think you know what the career looks like, but in reality, there's often people behind and individuals that were there on key moments when you had key challenges.
Absolutely.
So thank you for sharing that. And does that person know how important they've been for you?
It's a good question. Well, he left BCG afterwards at some point, as many do, right? It's a very normal path in the career. I did connect with him when I joined, and I said thank you. I was thankful, and we obviously stood in touch, but we lost sort of sight. So he does know, but we lost a bit of sight.
Yeah,
over time.
It's interesting, and so it's important for us to remember, one, when we go out into our careers, to seek out, as you say, people that would be willing to help, because there are often those people out there in all the companies that we go to. And I suppose at some point you switch over to paying it back, right? And sort of being that person that can actually help other people along the way. And that's a beautiful moment. I wanted to ask you about this, but you already kind of answered it, which is when you were at BCG, you liked it. You know, you took a while to sort of really find the confidence in some of the soft skills. And from there on out, do you just know that, hey, this is my home and I like this and I'm going to build my career here, or how does it develop?
Well, I would wish it's as linear as you just described. It's obviously not, right? So I enjoyed it. What I didn't, I enjoyed the people side of it. On the BCG side, but also on the client side, you get to know a lot of amazing people. You learn a lot from others.
You were in Munich, by the way, officially, or in Milan?
I was in Munich. I started in Vienna. I then went again to university in Singapore and in France. I then came back to Munich. I worked a lot in London. I worked a lot in South Africa. I worked very internationally, actually. So I wasn't that German-centric, so to speak. And I got to learn a lot, and look, there were many positive situations and much reinforcement. There was also, look, situations which were hard, look, I got elected partner in July 2012, and sort of as you get elected partner, you have a client base you serve, and the main client I was working with at the time, there was a big leadership change just in that July. Yeah, just in that July, essentially, was a large leadership change, and essentially the new leadership decided that they would change the approach in terms of how they would work with advisors at the time, right? So I had invested much of my career at the time into, I would say, into that particular client and that particular industry, and in the course of weeks, for reasons I had nothing to do with, it essentially fell apart. And so yeah, you can imagine, right? You just get elected partner, you get all these great congratulatory emails, and you feel really bad, right? Because you say, oh my God, thank you very much for congratulating me. This is going to be very short-lived. So I actually sort of didn't have a great summer thereafter.
Because the way it works, of course, you get elected partner, you say you serve a client base, but that also means it's almost a little bit like you eat what you kill, right? Like you're responsible then to make sure that you bring in revenue through clients. That's sort of how you maintain your stature as a partner, right? Like you really have the responsibility to make sure the company grows by bringing in clients.
I wouldn't formulate it the way you did, I think, but it is, because it's
I'm a journalist, so I can use a little bit more visual language.
You can use, but I wouldn't not just formulate it because of the language. I think it's actually also it's not entirely correct, right?
Okay.
But you're obviously, how shall I say, as a partner, you're asked sort of to serve a certain client base, right? You have a commercial responsibility. Obviously, that's why you're a partner, right? That's why you're an owner of the firm. It doesn't. It's not as short-sighted as you just formulated it, right? But obviously, how should I say, right? I mean, your raison d'être depends obviously on, I would say, the ability to serve a certain client base, right? I mean, that's how life is.
And at that point, you felt like the ground was, shifting under your feet?
Because the ground was shifting under my feet. It was, right? Because, I mean, much of what I had invested, like my time in the last years, was essentially being questioned. And so.
And how did you recover from that?
Well, I did recover.
Clearly,
as I mentioned, the recovery was essentially the first step to the recovery was actually, or the most. So ultimately, you sort of start serving different clients and you build up another client base, right? That's sort of what happens.
Sure.
But the more important part of that recovery is that you sort of is your inner self, right? Is because you're obviously devastated, you lose self-confidence, you're sort of, oh my God, where is this going? And sort of, for me, the most important part of that recovery was to find that resilience. Yeah, and I got it by, I had lots of friends at BCG, also outside of BCG. I did look for those conversations, and I was surprised. Many people had very similar stories to tell me, and,
right.
and sort of I discovered that I'm not the first one. Right?
It's a lesson that when you open up, when you show vulnerability, including sometimes to colleagues, which is risky,
yes.
Because you wonder, is it going to hurt my reputation? Are people going to watch me now badly? But then it's surprising actually that oftentimes people appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And then open back up to you.
That's exactly what happened. So I think it was, a moment of truth. I was surprised how precisely what you just described could happen, and people were genuinely helpful, and so it gave me also the confidence, the resilience to sort of manage through that. And I think that's, besides the piece of advice which I gave before on the mentorship, I think the other advice I would also give to everyone is resilience is a super important skill. Because let me tell you one thing, it's not going to be linear. It's not going to be. Also, Judith said it earlier, have the courage maybe also to adapt, to shift. That's true, right? I think, but it's also true that there is going to be bumps. I wish, I hope, maybe not.
Right.
Some of you, for very
some
few.
people are born for luck, and
some people are born for luck, but most people will not. Most people will not. And then I think the key skill is actually resilience. It's about recovery. Yeah? And resilience and recovering, it's not in the outside, it's in you, right? I think you need to keep going. You may need to adapt certain things and so on. You need to keep the self-confidence. And I think maybe having a network that can help you get there. You don't need to do it alone, but as you said, opening up and so on, I think is going to be helpful. Yeah.
If you then look at, you make that shift, you make it to partner, which is a very important milestone. You're confronted with a big challenge. You recover from that. Now we're still talking about a gap of a couple of years between then and now. Yeah. When did you realize, hey, I'm not just going to succeed as a partner, but I'm actually going to be able to be a leader in this global company? How did that happen?
Yeah, so I was then a partner. I rebuilt my client base. I truly enjoy advising companies. I truly enjoy making others successful. So I love that part of what BCG and sort of the advisory space gives you, right? So I love that. And then sort of I was responsible, so I served clients on the industrial space. I was responsible then first, I was being asked to lead a global sector. And I enjoyed sort of the development opportunity which that gave to me personally. It was a global role, so you get to know many others. So really, and then sort of at some point, I was asked to lead our business in Germany. And I was hesitating. I was actually I wasn't 100% sure, well, is this right or not? Because precisely what you said, it would take me away from what I actually love, which is the client side, which is the advice, because it takes time, right? You still continue in sort of a job like mine. You're never giving up on the client side 100%, but you sort of, time is finite, the day is 24 hours, right? So I would have to give up on that. So I was hesitating. And the reason that ultimately then drew me into that was actually the fact that I saw this as another means to personally develop. So to develop as a leader, to help others grow, and I to date don't regret it.
Yeah, and so then you really get into that sort of leadership. You lead the company, you lead people. Yep. If you now have to say what's next for you, do you continue to see things that you would like to achieve, that you would like to work on? What happens after you've reached the top?
It's a good question, Peter. If I would only know.
You come here for an interview, of course. It's
that's
what you
of course. But look, I think so. My source of motivation was never, how should I say, a title or the next title and so on. I always got energy out of what I do, advising companies, helping others succeed in my leadership roles and so on. And that's still true, right? That's true today, right? That's true today on a larger scale. And I get a lot of joy out of that and a lot of energy out of that. And that's my purpose, I would say, at the moment. And my objective is to do that as well as I can. I have a lot of passion on the entrepreneurial side. I do think it's important for leaders to stay fresh and think about truly as an entrepreneur. I do that. I did it all my life at BCG. I'll do that until my last day at BCG, and I'll do it thereafter. But I have a lot of passion for that part. So that will certainly be a constant, I would say, in my life. Yeah.
That's amazing. I want to make sure we leave some time for questions from the audience. Yep. I loved this first part of the conversation. Thank you, and I think a lot of people did too. Thank you for listening to us. So we've got a question over here. I want to make sure I go to some people in the back, and then also one over here. So there was a gentleman there. Yeah, about there in the middle, I think. Yeah, sure.
Good evening. My name is Siddharth, and back in India, I was a consultant working for Deloitte USI. And now as a student, as an international student, who's trying to break into the world of consulting in Europe, what key qualities in firms like BCG value the most for non-European applicants like me?
Thank you. That's a great question. I want to make sure we get to the gentleman there with the glasses. I think you were also raising your hand, right? So let's get the second question in, and then we'll... Oh, sorry, over here. Him with the glasses. We'll get time for a couple more questions after that.
Hello, Mr. Taube. My name is Sigurd Min. I'm a student of EU Business School, and my question is, what do you think about integrating AI in financial services, financial institutions, for example, as Deutsche Bank did with NVIDIA, so they collaborated, and what is your vision and what is the future of financial services, financial institutions with AI? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
So
the first question was on of course, what qualities do you value, especially also from non-European applicants?
Yep. So what qualities do we value? I don't think there is a huge difference sort of in terms of where people come from, in terms of what we value, but maybe to be specific sort of on what is sort of needed to succeed in consulting. I think it starts by, I would say, a strong analytical skill set. At the end of the day, we ground recommendations in very often in data, in sound analytics, and so having that foundation, I think, is super important. Yeah, it's also super important that, and there I think there is a link to the AI point. I think using AI on that analytical part is sort of an incremental step. I would say these days it's important. So that's one part. The second thing I would say, which is very important, is the ability to approach problems in a structured way. Problems are often, they're never the same. When clients come to us with a question, they're never the same. So I think it's super important that overall as a project team, but then also individually as an individual, you're capable and able to sort of break this down into the steps and sort of peel the onion, right, in a good way. So structured problem solving is a super important skill set. And thirdly, I would say communication is a really, and I would say broadly interpersonal skills is a really important and probably more and more and more and more important thing, because at the end of the day, yes, we deliver insight, yes, we deliver solutions to problems, but really we deliver change. And change only happens through people. And to deliver people, to sort of have people change and adapt, you need to communicate, you need to interact with them, you need to make sure they understand the recommendations, they adopt it, and they move it on. So the three things we're looking for is people with a sound analytical skill set, with the ability to structurally sort of approach problem solving in a good way, and thirdly, that have that ability to communicate and act with people in a very effective way. So that's, I would say, and that's true for candidates from Europe, from outside of Europe. I think there's no big difference in that. On the AI question, it's a really good question, and it's sort of a question, obviously, which is the answer to it is changing by its day. I'll start by first of all saying that indeed AI is disrupting many, many industries and many, many functions. And I would sort of always say that it's obviously a constantly moving part, but on the functional side, I would always say probably the most disrupted function is marketing. Yeah? And on the industry side, probably the most disrupted industry is indeed everything around services, and particularly financial services. So your question is indeed spot on. So applying that technology and bringing it to life is a big deal. It's a big deal for companies such as Deutsche, but obviously not only. And it's a big deal to change the interactions with their customers, which will be more AI-based. People will interact less with humans. They will interact more with agents at the end of the day. But also the way many of the internal processes are run, right? So I think you can automate a lot. You can a lot more, right? And this is all on the retail, I would say, on the retail banking side. And then you move on onto the commercial side, the wholesale banking side, and then the investment banking side. I mean, you can think about many use cases in that space. So it's going to be an industry which is going to be powered a lot and disrupted also a lot by AI. Yeah.
Excellent. I had a question here in the front, and then I want to see if we can go to a question. Okay, maybe over there. Fine. So here, and then the gentleman in the white shirt. We're going to get a microphone over, I think. Yeah, and okay, sure. We'll take one more question in the back, and then if we can bring a microphone over here, that's great. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Lusajo, and I come from Tanzania. My question revolves around BCG is known to attract top talents, right? And my question really relies on how does BCG, I would say, prepare the next generation for to create a proper impact in this highly changing world.
Yeah. So should we take another
question? Can you over here? Yeah, a second question. But you remembered that question?
I will.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Anastasia Fedotushkina. I'm working for Page Group. I'm Senior Associate Director in a recruitment consultancy. And my question is about how you personally try to balance your work and life, because I saw an Oura Ring, and maybe this is a Garmin watch.
That's true.
And how it is handled in the regions you are leading, because consultancy was known in the past for not so great at work and life balance, but the situation changed, and I would like to hear your opinion how you did it with the regions you are leading.
Yep.
Excellent.
So maybe I start in the back,
sure.
Right? So the question was about how do we prepare people that are, or BCG attracts top talent, and how do we make sure that that top talent really become the leaders of the future? And I think it's a really good question, because we sort of value proposition also for people joining BCG. It's obviously you join a great company, but really I think people want to develop and want to use also BCG to become those great leaders, right? Now, what are we doing in order to make sure that they can become those leaders of the future in today's world. So one is we place a lot of emphasis, of course, on sort of having people learn, I would say, this sort of traditional skill set of leadership, right? That starts off by, on a more consulting level, you will learn everything I said earlier about problem solving, but then when you become a project leader, about how to manage projects, how to sort of lead clients along the way and so on. So you get sort of, I would say, the core leadership principles along your way. Number one. Number two, you will see a lot of industries. Yeah, you will see a lot of industries. You will start with a relatively broad base. You will then narrow down, focus on one, and get to know that in depth. But you will see a lot, and that will help you because you will obviously maybe get to know one, maybe two industries more in depth, but you will also see others, so you can draw analogies, right? So that's a second thing which we think is important for also preparing leaders of the future. And the third thing, you will be confronted with very difficult decisions. With decisions about when you make a recommendation, should it go left, should it right? And these decisions or these recommendations, there's seldom an answer which is 0-1, like the analysis tells you should do precisely that. I'll caution you that seldom exists. Very often it requires interpretation, it requires business judgment, it requires ethical judgment. And I think by being exposed to an environment such as in BCG, you will be a much better leader also in that. So you will get much better judgment in so many dimensions, on the business side, on the ethical side, and so on, which hopefully makes you a great leader. So I would say we hope to build, quote unquote, a curriculum which gets you A, the basics of leadership, B, the industry depth, broad, but then also deep, and C, also this judgment on the business, but also beyond, importantly and increasingly important, on the ethical side. Now, there is a fourth thing, and I think you also sort of one thing, and that's a bridge a little bit to the question afterwards. What you will also learn at BCG is to make sure you balance, you cope with things, right? Because there is the workload is high. The workload is high at BCG, but it's also high in other high-paced jobs. And I think the ability to self-organize and get things done is an important success factor for many leaders. And it's a bit of a link to the work-life balance question afterwards, but it's also a thing you should over time, of course, learn. Now, with that, I will switch to the the
Oura question.
The Oura question, right? So indeed, this is an Oura ring, right? So for those of you who don't know, this is sort of a ring that helps you measure all sorts of data about sleeps and so on. It's a Finnish startup, and it actually works pretty well. So, and this indeed is a Garmin watch, you're right. So I am passionate about sports. That's why I use this watch. And it's all sorts of sports. So I'm passionate, as Peter alluded. I'm a passionate skier. I'm passionate about ski touring. So this is hiking up and then skiing down, and climbing and all sorts of other things. So this is where it helps me. But I think the question really was also about well, how do we deal with work-life balance, right? And what is sort of how have things maybe also evolved over time? So first of all, as I said before, it's an important skill set I think we all learn over time. I do think in today's world we are much more attentive to making sure that we balance things out. Obviously, because it's a part of the value proposition to our people, because people talent today, I think, has a different, I would say, places a different emphasis on it. But also, we think it's, frankly, it's not that effective to have 80-hour work weeks or whatever, right? You're not going to be productive in that, right? So we place much more attention. We place much more attention to it and teach people also skill sets to deal with. And then I think, look, every individual, I think, one needs to also find your own way. So, for example, I protect my weekends to a large degree. As illustrated, I am passionate about sports, right, which helps me unwind. And everyone will be different about that. But you do need to actively, I would say, make choices and then act upon them.
Excellent. I had promised I'd take that final question and then we'll wrap it up. So if we can bring the microphone to this gentleman in the white shirt, and then we'll end it. Yeah, over there. No pressure. Last question of the night.
I tried. Hello, my name is Vladislav. I'm a student. And coming back into geopolitics, you represent company headquartered in States. And your personal feelings, what will be happening between United States and European Union in terms of business relationships? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This is
easy, the last one.
You get the last questions.
Just an easy one.
So it's obviously a time which is, how should I say, it is turbulent. I think that's fair to say, right? I feel that as a company, right, and as a corporation, BCG's, our first and foremost objective is, or we have, I think, a couple of objectives, right? Our main objective is to make our clients better. I think we also need to go back to what we should be all about. Our first objective is to make our clients better. Our second objective, which is very much related to that, is we need to do a good job for our people. We need to be very respectful to our people. We need to make sure our people have development opportunities, and we need to make sure that they have an environment in which they can thrive. And then thirdly, yes, we also have a duty, I would say, to society as a whole, right? Now, on that third aspect, right, what is the role, right? How far should one go, right? Should we take a position in one or the other? I'm not sure about that one, right? I think it is, I do think sort of, and there's different schools of thought, right? There is different schools of thought. I'm sure there is leaders that say, look, I think it's absolutely the role of CEOs, leaders, and so on to also take a stance in many of those positions. There is another school of thought that says, look, people should do what they're best at, right? And entities should do what they're best at. And that means for companies that they are best at, I don't know, BMW is very good at producing cars. You produce cars, right? Political parties are very good at taking a position and ruling a company. That's what they should do, right? They shouldn't produce cars, right? Consulting companies are very good at making their clients better, at providing opportunities for their people, and overall acting in that. And I think that is sort of the first and foremost thing we should stick to, right? There is, and as tempting as it may seem, right? I feel that there is a bit of a danger of sometimes overstepping it, right? Particularly these days, because also you don't know, right? It's a very uncertain world now, right? So that's sort of, it's a bit of a more generic answer, right? But I think
I respect that.
I do feel that is sort of that is overall, I think, sometimes maybe a healthy approach, right?
Yeah, it's, of course it leaves wanting, right? Because we want to have answers, we want to have people that show moral leadership, but we realize, I think, and we've had many conversations with leaders over the past couple of years, also on geopolitics and the return of war, and I don't think I can think back of a moment where there was an answer that I said that's it, and it also, and even if it had been there, even if you had the best point of view, you're not in the position that you can change it. It is, at the end of the day,
it's a reality you deal with, right? And I'll give you an example. It's not the situation between the United States and Europe, but so in my region, we have an office as BCG in Tel Aviv. We have an office, several offices in the broader Middle East, in Dubai, in Riyadh, in Egypt. There is Jewish people at BCG. There is people of Palestine origin at BCG. There is people of many different religions at BCG, right? And I think we owe all of them respect. And I think, and as I'm sure many know, it's a very complicated conflict, right? It's a very complicated conflict. And of course, it's always easy to say, oh my God, it's so terrible on this side. Oh my God, it's so terrible on the other side. The reality is also, I think we all need to learn that sometimes we don't know as much about some of these things, right? They go back a long time in history, right? And they're very complicated in nature, right? And there is also often, so it is, and I think it's tempting to say, oh, I'm on this side, I'm on that side, I'm on that. At the end of the day, I mean, it's a little bit also who am I to say? Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, what is my role in this, right? And my role in this, of course, is I make clients in that part of the world better. I make sure that I have, obviously I obey to all the laws. I make sure that the people are safe, that people are treated respectful, right? That people treat each other respectful. I'm sure there is different political views about that particular conflict, and also about others within BCG. I'm sure there are, right? But it's also a little bit, who am I to say, right? And there is also a bit of a respect versus the individual in that sense, that we do respect different points of view as long as people sort of abide to their standards. And I feel we are being tested in that dimension. We are.
There's no question.
But I just wanted to illustrate it on that example. And of course, it's very different facets and so on, true with the current administration in the United States, right? And with, frankly, also with other administrations in the world,
right.
In India, in Europe. And I mean, it's not true for just one particular country.
I appreciate that you leaned into the question, even as you feel like it is not your place to take a strong position, that you dare to say, okay, this is what I'm struggling with. This is the difficulty that I have to really be able to do that. And I really appreciate that you say, at the end of the day, the most important thing that I can do as a leader responsible for people is to show respect for the individuals that I am in touch with. And that's, I think, my takeaway from that last question, which I appreciate. Now we have sadly reached the end of our conversation. I want to thank you, of course, for an extremely insightful conversation, for showing us how you lead, but also showing us how you deal with challenges. And I want to thank every one of you for having joined us. I know it's late. I know it's time for a drink. Thank you all for joining us for Learning from Leaders, and see you next week.
Peter,
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.